I want to quickly give an explanation about the situation of Roger, because I think many people don't really understand how that went. So Roger was appointed by Mother to be the architect of Auroville, and because of him taking on that role of creating the city of Auroville physically, he became automatically part of the administration of Auroville. So even though he was not officially in the Sri Aurobindo Society, he was officially appointed as part of the administration that decided about Auroville. That's why he was really a figure of authority in Auroville in the early years, as long as Mother was still there. Roger was really part of Auroville and decided with the society people about Auroville and was involved in everything that had to do with the administration of Auroville. So then Mother leaves her body and the war with the society starts, and it went really violent and quite quickly. And so at one point Roger's office was closed because it was in Pondy. He had an office in Pondy from where Auroville was administrated, was governed more or less. So when his office was closed, he left India and went back to France because there was nothing here for him anymore to do. If he wasn't allowed to develop and build the city of Auroville, what was he here for? So in 1978, Roger left Auroville, and only 10 years later, in 1988, he came back. And at that time, Auroville had completely changed. Obviously, everything was different from what he had known. So in the meantime, there had been that whole fight with the SAS, which had gone to court, which had involved the Indian government in Delhi. So the real takeover of Auroville was at that time and not now or something. There's no takeover right now. The takeover was back then, when the same rebels that were here and were fighting against the authority of the Sri Aurobindo Society, they handed over Auroville to the Indian government and wanted and got, in fact, the control over Auroville back through the back door. So there's a big difference sometimes between a situation that is de jure, what means the official legal situation, and the situation de facto, which means the situation on the ground, the actual things that are happening. So legally, from 1980, the government took charge of Auroville and dethroned, so to speak, the Sri Aurobindo Society. So at that moment, everything changed fully. And who I call the kings and queens of Auroville, they actually got what they wanted, and they got to decide on the ground what happened in Auroville, even though legally they didn't have the right to do that. In the end, that's what actually happened, because Delhi had installed an administrator in Auroville who was legally supposed to rule Auroville, but what would that person from Delhi know about what happened here? What would they do here? So this person came here and then had to depend on the people that had begged for this takeover to happen and needed to have a relationship with them. So even Mr. Oja, who was in fact for most of the time the administrator in Auroville here, he admitted to Amrit at that time that he could not publicly and openly defy the Western Aurovilians that had arranged that government takeover. So if I speak about kings and queens of Auroville, it's not hyperbolic, it's not joking. It is really, these people ruled here and decided who, what, where, when. So this is, even the official administrator from Delhi would have to admit that he didn't have the power to really decide things here, and he needed to placate, and he needed to at least publicly follow and do what these people decided. So that's immense. People really need to understand that. they really had the power here. They were the ones who decided things, and it's been like that for all these decades. Since 1980, that's how it went down here. And that is also why these people are so super angry now, because 4 decades later, they just can't accept that anything changes. It's just not acceptable for them that they would suddenly no longer be the ones to decide what happens in Auroville. So when Roger came back in 1988, he was confronted with this completely new situation where, in fact, a faction of rebels, of Western hippie people and anti-city people, these people didn't want authority, didn't want to live in a city, wanted a completely different thing. These people were now in charge. And so you need to understand that Frederick in 2017 admitted himself that he had in the early days promised Roger that yes, we will cut all the trees, we will break down all the buildings when the city is built, when it's needed. Let us build things now and we will break it all down. And of course later nothing of that all happened and only rebellion came, because why would they do any of that? They had gotten the power to decide what happened here. Roger had lost his position completely. So when he came back in 1988, he came back to see what there was to do. He was begged and asked to come back here by the city people that were still here also. And he came, and there was a big meeting that was held at one point to see where Roger would now fall in the whole equation, because it was obvious that Roger would not get his status back as he had before, because the society and the whole thing had changed. Nothing was the same here anymore. So when Roger came back in 1988, he came back to a completely different situation, and his position and his authority didn't count anymore. So from 1988 up until his death in 2008, Roger was in damage control mode. He tried to implement whatever he still could of the galaxy plan. It was obvious that there was an immense resistance against it, and that he had to deal with these people. He could not just overrule them, because they had been given the power, so to speak. They had won the war against the SAS, and they had been given the power to decide what happens in Auroville. So he needed to navigate that whole thing. And it's very, very important to understand that Roger didn't decide anything anymore after 1978. So he came back, he stayed here until the end of his life. He mainly implemented he finished Matrimandia mainly, and everything else in the city, in the galaxy plan that he could somewhere implement, he implemented. He made immense concessions and compromises. It is obvious from everything that he decided, or that is seen that he was doing, it is obvious that he had to make humongous compromises, and that he was just trying to get through whatever he could get implemented whatever he could implement, but that he was no longer able to just say, okay, we're going to build the galaxy, we're going to do that. Because the galaxy, when I came, the galaxy was like, it was in the waste bin. People openly laughed when you would say that you were pro-galaxy and that you wanted the galaxy to be built. It was like a pipe dream. It was like, what are you? You're coming with something that is already dead. They had killed and buried and I mean everything. The galaxy was dead for these people. And so even at that time when I came, when I told Jacqueline, Roger's partner, who worked very closely with him for 40 years or more, she was almost incredulous when I told her that I absolutely believe that a galaxy would be built one day. Because when you look at a galaxy plan, you can see this is something that just needs to happen. It's too special, it has a force behind it, and we need that here. We really need the galaxy here. It's so special. And so she was so incredulous when I said it, because for her, with all that opposition of decades and decades of opposition, she hardly could believe that it would ever happen still. So it is such a pity that we don't have Roger with us right now to let him see that, yes, we're serious. We're building the galaxy. We're making Mother City here. We're moving forward. Jai Ma, Jai Hind.